I was so humiliated by that I just cried all the way home, and I curled up in the fetal position under the Bible stand in my parents' living room. And I really had a dark moment. All I could hear is my first grade teacher, who had said to my parents, "I'm afraid your son will never be able to read or write, never be able to communicate, never amount to anything, never go very far in life." And I was really having a low moment, thinking maybe this whole idea of teaching is a delusion, and maybe I best go back and serve. And my mom came home from shopping, and she saw me there, and she said, "Son, what happened? What's wrong?" She hadn't seen me cry since I was, 13 years old. And I said, "Mom, I blew the test. I got a 27. I guess I don't have what it takes after all." And she just paused for a minute and then said something only a mother could say. She said, "Son," she put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Son, whether you become a great teacher and travel the world like you dream, whether you return to Hawaii and ride the biggest waves in the world, or return to the streets and panhandle as a bum, I just want to let you know that your father and I are going to love you no matter what you do." And whoa, did I need that at that moment.
That's amazing.
When she did that, my hand went into a fist. I looked up and I saw the vision the night I was with Paul Bragg of me standing in front of a million people speaking. And I said to myself, I'm going to master this thing called learning and reading and studying. I'm going to master this thing called teaching. And I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'm going to travel whatever distance. I'm going to pay whatever price to give my service of love across this planet. I'm not going to let anybody on the face of the earth stop me, not even myself.
Hi, and welcome to another episode on Unlocked from Within. Today's guest is Dr. John Demartini. He is a world-renowned specialist in human behavior, a researcher, best-selling author of over 43 books, and a global educator for over 50 years. He was on the movie The Secret, and he has developed a series of solutions across all market sectors and age groups. His education and teachings ranges from corporate empowerment programs, financial empowerment strategies, self-development programs, relationship solutions, and social transformation programs. His teachings start at the core of the issue, addressing the human factor and range out to a multitude of powerful tools that have proven the test of time. He has studied over 30,650 books across all the defined academic disciplines and has synthesized the wisdom of the ages, which he shares on stage in over 100 countries. His presentations, whether keynotes, seminars, or workshops, leave clients with insights into their behavior and keys to their empowerment. Dr. Demartini has addressed public and professional audiences and shared the stage with some of the world's most influential people such as Sir Richard Branson, Stephen Covey, Steve Wozniak, Robert Kiyosaki, Tony Fernandez, Wayne Dyer, Deepak Chopra, Donald Trump, and many more. Dr. John Demartini's mission and vision is to share knowledge and the wisdom that empowers you to become a master of your own life and destiny. We welcome today Dr. John Demartini.
I'm familiar with all of those components. I taught hypnosis.
Yep.
I've done Swiss techniques and NLP.
Yep.
The challenge that I would have with that is you're trying to take something that's distressful and negative, if you will, in their minds, and trying to leave them with a positive. In the 1970s, I did that kind of thing. But then I realized that I was polarizing the mind and trying to escape and dissociate from so-called negatives to try to get positives. And homeostasis is integrating, not separating. So I transformed those approaches into an integrated approach. So if you ask me about something that I'm disturbed by, I immediately look for the upsides to it, neutralize it out, balance it, because I don't believe there is such a thing as something negative. I think there's something that I'm unconscious of the positives to, and I don't think there's something positive. I think that I'm conscious of the negatives, and once I become fully conscious, it is neither. It transcends the labels of positive versus negative. So I'm not really interested in getting rid of a negative and putting in a positive, because I find that those ultimately give a temporary feel good, and they basically do, but that now they have the fantasy that I want to go and stay there. And then they end up attracting the opposite pole to bring them back into homeostasis. But now they want this side, and now they're being brought into homeostasis, which is both sides. You have the parasympathetic nervous system for the positive, you got the sympathetic for the negative, and you need both of them for homeostasis and resilience. So I'm not interested in avoiding a negative and seeking a positive, but I'd be interested in doing it if it's integrative. Everything I'm working and teaching is about integration, not so much. The amygdala wants to avoid pain and seek pleasure. The executive center wants to integrate those and see that neither exist, and they were just unconscious and conscious splits and illusions in their subconscious mind.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in integrating more so than polarizing. So if
So
there's an integrative process,
yeah,
I would be interested. But if
Yeah.
it's a polarizing process, I find that that's just a distraction and a dissociation from something that I am under the illusion is a negative in the first place. And I don't have a lot of that because I immediately take the
you've
time
done
to
it
go
all.
through and
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, I've been doing that for 50 years.
50 years. I know. That's why I'm always intrigued, because yeah, it's interesting. Like I've done it on myself. Like I had
Well, I used to take patients with cancer, um, and we used to have them go and undergo an induction. Sometimes I didn't do 30 steps. I would do maybe 10 steps
yeah.
until they're relaxed. So they're now more alpha theta state. So they're more receptive to seeing both sides. And I would have them go in there and identify the components of their pain. They'd have osteosarcoma and they'd have extreme pain in their bones eroding away. And I go in, I just did it just literally 5 days ago. And I would identify, they would have black or dark red, or they'd have stagnant, or they'd have, it's throbbing, or they'd have these associations and submodality distinctions associated with the pain. And I would itemize each one of those down to all the senses, and is it moving, is it stationary, and this kind of thing. And I'd put that into a colored box of their choice. And then I would take the complementary opposite from Wilhelm Wundt's work and find out the opposite color, complementary opposite color. And I would take whatever they perceived would be the opposite of that and put that in another box. And then I would, like a particle accelerator, slam them together and birth light out of particles and antiparticles in their minds. And it would just come out light, and the whole thing would just poof. And in the process of doing it, then I would ask, so what is the benefit of this pain? And they'd find the upsides to it and find out it brought them their mother and father to visit them. They got their kids close to them. People are doing things for them. Their husbands now having time for, they're now not having to dote over everybody. And once I do that, I ask them now, can you feel the pain? They can't possibly feel the pain. Pain's gone. But they now have a different association with, they've reframed and restructured a cognitive reappraisal of their experience. And they may go for 5 or 6 hours. And then over time, they may accumulate new systems that may create their pain systems again. And so I'll go in and do it again. And I could reduce the pain and get them through palliative without having to give them morphine to assist them in their cancer treatments. So we used to do that. But the challenge with that is that then they get associated. The brain tends to, in the amygdala, tends to have the nucleus accumbens for pleasure, and it has a striatum for this pain system. And so then what it does, it separates and assumes you can get one without the other. But when you're conscious of one, the other's there in the unconscious. And you're conscious of the other one, it's there. So I found out that what that does is by separating them, I'm actually polarizing them and adding to their subconscious instincts and impulses, which makes them more looking for a fantasy and avoiding a pain. So I integrated them and showed that they were synchronous and synthesized. Wilhelm Wundt described it simultaneous complementary opposites. And when I would synthesize them, they were poised. They didn't have the pain. They didn't have the pleasure. They were just present. And I found that was more healing physiologically. I found more autonomic equilibrium, more resilience, heart rate variability showed it. Blood vascular system, cytokine levels changed. And I found that integration was more important than dissociation from a pain and restructuring it to try to make a pleasure out of it, because that actually polarized the autonomics. So that's why integrative systems I found were more lasting than temporary polarizations. So I stopped doing that 38 years ago.
Wow. That's fascinating. So what would your take be on, which I'm really interested to know, is I did that session that I just told you on myself, and I got my wife to do it on myself because one of my mentors I was having a conversation with, and she was saying, "Oh, I think you've got a trauma from your childhood." And she told me it in a conversation, and I said, "I don't recall a trauma in my childhood. I'd know about it." And she was saying, you must have buried it deep within yourself. And I was like,
And you
okay.
uncovered it when you went down?
And so,
You uncovered it when you went down?
yeah, and so I put the intention out before I did that session, because she goes, "Oh, just try doing that session that you do on everyone else, and do it on your get your wife to do it on yourself, or get someone to do it on yourself. Do that process." And I put the intention out, and through the breathing, through the breathwork stage, the moment just popped in, the scene, everything popped in, and I was a blubbering mess, reliving that moment, and went through the process and whatnot. And when I came out of it, I was just amazed that I had that trauma deep buried down, where before, looking back on that scenario, I knew it was messed up, but I didn't think it was traumatic. And what I got out of doing that session was looking at it from a different lens, in the sense that what I got from it, the meaning I got from it, was that I got to unravel the blockage, my money blockage, which was from that moment and scene, and it was around my mother, and I looked back on it. I didn't have the anger towards my mum. I understood what she did. She thought and believed she had to do it, and that was the only way. But as an 8-year-old boy, I had her on a pedestal. It was the first time I saw her do something like that. And I thought the amount of crying and whatnot would have stopped her from doing it, but she still did it. And what I got from it was, like, it shaped why I try to control things in my life, but as well as feeling out of control, like I couldn't stop her from doing what she did. And it got me to the root cause of my money blockage, which I just found quite profound, which I'd go to all these different workshops and, read all the books, on, if you've got a money issue or whatever and whatnot. And it sort of started unraveling last year, where someone tried to gift me something of quite an expensive gift, and I couldn't take it gracefully. And I had to look back and reflect for 3 days after it. And from there, I was like, oh, I've got an issue with receiving. And then from that reflection over the 6 months, the event of someone telling me, my mentor saying that I've got a traumatic experience, and then that's how it unravels. So I'm just curious on your take of it.
Anytime you have a perception, moment by moment in your life, that is associated with support and the positive, or challenge and the negative, and it's polarized to one side, you're conscious of the upsides, you're unconscious of the downsides, or you're conscious of the downside, unconscious of the upsides. Anytime you have that subjective biased, false attribution bias statement or perception, those are designed to be stored in the brain in what is called the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind is all the facilitations and inhibitions in the brain that haven't been neutralized and integrated. The executive center integrates it, the amygdala separates it. So anything that's an emergency situation where we perceive it's pleasure and prey, or pain and predator, we will store in the subconscious mind. Now, they can be extreme, which could be ecstatic or traumatic, or they could be mild, moderate. And they're buried there, and they will stay there indefinitely until it's been neutralized. Now, we have homeostatic mechanisms in the brain that are there to try to neutralize them. There's hedonic adaptation, there's desensitization, there's new associations. Our memories, our episodic memories are malleable because of that. And some of them become neutralized over time. We have this event that we think is terrible, and a day, a week, a month, a year, 5 years later, we go, thank God that occurred. We automatically have the wisdom of the ages with the aging process instead of the wisdom of the ages without it. But if you ask a set of questions, which questions make you conscious of things you would normally be unconscious of. And ones that balance out the misperception, just like you were adding, what would you prefer it to be? And let's replace it. That's like a new association. And you go in there and find out what the upside is to what you thought was terrible and the downside to what you think is terrific, and bring them into equilibrium simultaneously, where you see both. You're not polarized to one or the other. You don't label it. There's no subjective bias there, which the amygdala does. It now is out of the subconscious mind. It's equilibrated in the brain. There's integration. And you have what we could call the superconscious mind. And the superconscious mind looks down on it from a broad view as neither positive nor negative, neither good nor evil. It's a universal meta-ethical state, instead of down into this moral hypocrisy of that this is bad and good, which is an artificial division that we've made up because of our programming. Because, you know, where does that come from? Why do we label it bad or good or terrific or terrible? Well, because it's survival of our body. Well, but nature has predator and prey. And so one life is at the expense of another life. So why is that morally good? These are arbitrarily things that's been indoctrinated into our system. So when we polarize the unpolarizable, divide the indivisible, name the inevitable, separate these inseparables, divide these indivisibles, they get stuck in our subconscious mind. We can go into that subconscious mind by whatever means. Breath work is one way. We did rebirthing back in the 70s.
Yeah.
And we get people. And if you balance the inhalation and exhalation of the sympathetic and parasympathetic system, if they're brought into perfect balance, kind of like pranayama, the yogis used to do, if they do, they're taking out space and time from the mind and becoming present. And the alpha theta state can create a gamma awareness, synchronize the brain, and all of a sudden you can access the other side of the unconscious and become fully aware all of a sudden. And you transcend the judgment and heal. So that's an integrative healing process. So the breath work works, and the hypnosis helps them get into the alpha theta state. All those tools are very useful. The only difference is I don't like to polarize it. In the 70s, when I realized that we were polarizing it, we're just now creating another new fantasy. And whenever you create a little bit of a fantasy in the mind, the other now becomes the shadow, the part you're trying to avoid. And anytime I do it, so I integrate it so there's nothing there to seek or avoid. There's just something there to appreciate and love.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're still setting yourself up for the idea that I don't want that to happen again. I want to avoid that. And you can run into a snag because the brain in the amygdala wants to avoid and seek. If it sees prey, it wants to grab it. It gets a false positive on the prey and a false negative on the predator at that moment, just to make sure the acceleration and adrenaline can allow it to capture that prey. The same thing in reverse on the predator. It wants to get away from that. But 99% of our life is not that way. It's not predator-prey dynamics. We've made it that way because of our misinterpretation. Much of our life is just love. It's a magnificent experience. And what we do is we go through and we distort our perceptions, put ourselves in that amygdala, label those things because of moral hypocrisies, traditions, conventions that we've indoctrinated ourselves by, instead of looked at whatever's happening, how is it actually integrated? I've not seen a traumatic event that can't be transformed into something to be grateful for. I've also seen people that are infatuated with events and they get caught and trapped in infatuations, and then they are never appreciative of their life because they're comparing their current reality to these fantasies. So they have downsides, and if you don't neutralize them, they're the source of your depressions, the fantasies about how you want your life to be. I'd rather get objective and strategic. When it comes to wealth building, there's three basic components. You're here to make sure you serve somebody because otherwise there's no source of income. You're here to appreciate money without resistance and not infatuate with it or resent it. And you're here to basically save and invest it so compound interest can make it grow, and invest it in something that serves people with sustainable fair exchange. When you do those things, no matter what your emotions are, your wealth starts to build. So you have the capacity to do that. But if for some reason you feel you have a built-in psychostat, an intuitive psychostat for fair exchange. So somebody gives you something that you in your mind don't know why I'm deserving this. it's wise to ask them, what do you believe I did to deserve that, so I can be cognizant of it? Because if not, I receive something for nothing, and then I feel guilty taking it because I don't know why you're giving this to me. But if you can inform them why they're getting it and the value of it, and they can identify what they did, and they go, thank you, you'll automatically say thank you. But if all of a sudden they give you less than what you think you deserve, you'll be resentful. If they give you more, you'll be feeling guilty. So I'm interested in making sure that when you give people, it's not a gift, it's an exchange that's sustainable, that's fair. And then you don't create polarizations of emotion inside people. So there's alternative strategies of interpretation of all of the things you described, but I'm interested in integrating because I didn't experience an exercise 37 years ago on positive thinking. And what I did, if you're interested in it, it's a very fascinating study. I took 300 of the best-selling books that were written on the market at the time. You know, the Power of Positive Thinking, How to Win Friends, Influence People, all the base psycho-cybernetics, those classic books.
The classics.
Yeah,
Think
I
and
took
Grow
300 of those books. Yeah, I had all those books. I had 300 of them. And what I did is I went through line by line and underlined every positive word that I found in those books. And I extracted that positive word and I stuck it on an index card, a 3x5 index card. So like a 3x5 index card, and put them in the top left corner. And I accumulated out of 300 books. The first book had the most, but by the time I got to the 300th book, there was only a few extra words because I already had them, because I put them alphabetical. So I go, oh, I got that word. Oh, I got that word. So I stopped at 300 books. So my objective was that I'm going to take the most positive words in the English language and I'm going to extract them. Then after doing that, I meditated on each word and I wrote out the most positive statement, affirmation, quotation that I could think of with the application and use of that word. And so I wrote 2,000. I found 2,000 positive words in those books. And I wrote 2,000 of the most positive statements that I could conceive of at the time, where I was at the time. I was 28 years old. So I wrote every positive word I could think of and every positive statement I could think of. And then I divided those 2,000 quotations or affirmations into 365 days. And it came to be 5 to 6 quotes per day.
Wow.
And then I took that and put 4 days worth of those positive words on a page and published a book, which is still out there. You can still go look it up. It's called 2,000 Quotes to the Wise by Demartini.
Okay.
And I published that book and sold 3 rounds of it, about 75,000 copies.
Wow.
And Success Motivation Institute used it for subliminal tapes and all kinds of things. It got it out there.
Yeah.
But then what I did is I made a commitment that I was now going to recite those daily affirmations, because that's 5 to 6 quotes a day, and memorize them. And then what I did is I took the japa beads from India and the rosary beads from the West, and I decided I was going to chant and recite or affirm these 5 to 6 quotations a day, 108 times a day.
Would you do it 3 times, like 3 times a day, like say it 3 times, or just say one of those affirmations once?
I said the affirmations 108 times a day, each affirmation. So that's 600 to 1,000 affirmations a day, each.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay. So now I did more than that because most of the time I was done by 2 o'clock. So I was doing 600 to 1,000 affirmations, positive statements, quotations a day. You can go online right now and go see, this is a real book. This is really there. You can look it up. You can buy it. You can find out it's real. And I divided it up. And during that time, I created a form called a day-by-day cycle forecasting form. And it was basically an evaluation of how I perceived my life 4 times a day throughout the day in 7 areas of life. So I had spiritual, mental, career, financial, family, social, and physical areas. So spiritual, mental, career, financial, family, social, and physical areas. And then across was 31 days, because it was a month. And each day was divided into 4 sections, 7 in the morning, 11 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon, 7 in the afternoon. And then each area of life was divided into +3 to -3. So spiritual was inspired or despired. Mental was sharp or dull, in as far as sharp-minded or dull-minded. Vocational was feeling successful or failure. And I went through a spectrum of +3, +2, +1, or 0 to 1 to 2, -1, -2, -3. And every 4 hours, a beeper would go off in my pocket at 7 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 7 o'clock. Beep, 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 beep. And I would pull out the form while I'm affirming these affirmations throughout the day. I'd pull out the form and I do an honest evaluation of where do I feel that I am in those 7 areas. And I would circle either 2 or 3 or -1 or 0 or whatever in each of those 7 areas. And then I would fold that up, put it back in my pocket, hit the timer again. 4 hours would go by. I would do it again. And I monitored 4 times a day how I felt throughout the day as a result of doing 600 to 1,000 affirmations a day of positive thinking.
Wow.
At the end of that, I did that for 2 years, every single day for 2 years, 24 months. I had 24 sheets with all this data on it. During that time, I was watching that because I had a hierarchy of values, and my highest value was teaching and mental development, and then probably business was second. In the areas that were high in my values, the volatilities of these were less. In the areas that were lower in my values, which was relationships primarily and social, I had more volatilities, I noticed. But when I went to the end, at the end of 2 years, on a Tuesday, I got a calculator out from Texas Instruments, and I total up all the numbers, +3, +2, -1, 0, whatever it was. And I put all the numbers and calculated through each of the areas of life, and it came out 0.
Wow.
And that means 0.001, but basically 0. So when I did that, I realized that our brain is homeostatic. And so if you go up, it brings you down. If you go down, it brings you up. It has like a thermostat. It is regulating your temperature. It's regulating your emotions to try to get you centered, which is actually not elated or depressed. It's actually trying to normalize you because you are less distracted in that state and more present in that state and more authentic in that state. Because when you're elated, you tend to puff yourself up with pride. When you're depressed, you tend to beat yourself with shame, and you tend to infatuate and resentment and have false perceptions of other people and put people on pedestals and pits instead of put them in your heart. But the brain is set up to try to get you homeostatic and to get you authentic and to try to appreciate life. When I got through that, I realized that I'd been wasting my time trying to be one-sided. And that was 37, 38 years ago. And I gave that up back then. That was the end of my pursuit of one-sidedness. I then asked myself, why do we have negativity? Why do we need that part? Instead of it being, because if it's there, it must serve a purpose already gone extinct, because everything that doesn't serve goes extinct. If it's not efficient, it gets deleted. So then I started to realize that the negativity was there to break our addiction to positivity. It was there to associate the pain with the fantasies that we were seeking. And we were in our amygdala, we sought a pleasure without a pain. We sought a positive without a negative. And so the pain was the shadow that was chasing that, to make sure that you associate pain with that, to break your addiction, to go back, to put the two together, and to be objective with life. That's why the Executive Center is involved in strategic planning to mitigate risks that occur, that you oversight yourself with fantasies, with the amygdala, and is trying to transform the subcortical area into the cortical expression of objectivity. When I finally realized that, I realized that there were 15 most common reasons why negativity were occurring. Number one was that people were expecting other people to be one-sided. You expect somebody to be positive, never negative, nice, never mean, kind, never cruel. And then I realized, where does that come from? It comes from religion and politics projecting a moral identity, a moral ideology, a moral hypocrisy onto society that's an impossible thing to achieve, to make people feel might say disempowered, so that's easy to control. And it was a control tactic. And I studied the whole history of those control tactics that have been used in religion for centuries. And then I realized that as long as we teach people to try to be one-sided, they're never going to be appreciative of themselves, because they're trying to be one-sided and trying to get rid of half themselves. How are you going to love yourself if you're trying to get rid of half of yourself? It's a real wake-up call to people. So when people, and I finally realized that the unrealistic expectation for people to be one-sided is delusion. If you're married, I don't know if you're married or not, but if you're married, you're not going to get a wife that's one-sided. She's going to be nice if you support her values. She's going to be mean if you challenge it. She's going to be kind and cruel. She's going to be positive and negative and supportive and challenging. That's the real thing, and that's what you're going to get. And if you can love that, you can love somebody. If you think they're always supposed to be one side, you're going to be depressed. You're going to feel betrayed. You're going to be angry. You're going to have anger and aggression, blame and betrayal, criticism and challenge, despair and depression, desire to exit and escape, futility and frustration, grouchy and griefness. You're going to have hatred and hurt. You're going to be insane and irritable. Those are a byproduct of one-sided thinking. So that's why I'm not interested in doing one-sided thinking. It's a farce. Then the second one is an unrealistic expectation on people to live in your values. They're not going to live in your values. They have their own unique set of priorities. Your wife is going to have a completely different set of values to you. If you're focused on business and intellectual pursuits, she'll probably focus on beauty and health and family or something. These are polarities, and you don't marry somebody that's identical to you. You'd be like a Twilight Zone. You'd marry somebody that's complementary. Imagine if you were married to you and woke up next to you, you'd probably shoot yourself real quick. So in the process of doing it, you can't expect somebody to live in your values, but people do. And they self-righteously think that their values are right. They filter the world through their values. They project that onto other people. They expect others to live in their values and see their model of the world. And when you do, you have anger and aggression and you feel betrayed. So those two things are the source of why we have negativity, because we have these fantasies that lead to these nightmare outcomes. Then you have another one, the combination of those two. Then you have an unrealistic expectation on yourself to be one-sided. I'm supposed to be up all the time. I'm supposed to be positive all the time. I'm supposed to be nice all the time. You're not going to be. No human being is that way. I've met gurus, I've met mystical leaders. Nobody's that way. It's BS. If they try to portray that, they're lying. They're frauds. There's nobody one-sided. You can't even do it. You can't even get a magnet one-sided. And all perceptions, you have muscles that are agonist and antagonist. You have autonomics that are sympathetic and parasympathetic. You have alkaline and acid. You got reduction and oxidation. Your body and physiology is designed to have pairs of opposites. Heraclitus said that in the 5th century BC. Pythagoras knew that in his times. So if we go through and then expect ourselves to be one side, we're going to have futility. And if we expect ourselves to live in somebody else's values, when we're infatuated with somebody, we stop doing what's important to us and try to live in their values for fear of loss of them. But it's short-lived. We can't sustain it because nobody can live in somebody else's values long-term. So if we have that, we're going to beat ourselves up and wonder why we keep sabotaging. Why do we have limited beliefs and all this other crap that goes along in self-help now? So what happens is we have these unrealistic expectations, and then we combine those. We want to be one-sided and we want to live outside our values. 99% of the people think that, why do I have no money? Well, because they have immediate gratification. They want to spend their money on immediate gratification and not on assets. They have no deferred gratification because they're in their amygdala, which is immediate gratification instead of executive function, strategy and planning long-term, which is what builds wealth. And then you have unrealistic expectations, putting all those together. Then you do it on collective society. We have an unrealistic expectation. Society is supposed to be peaceful all the time. It's not, never has been. It's not going to be. The Global Peace Index measures 99.7% of all the world's population and monitors 23 parameters on health, peace and war in every country around the world. And it shows a nice equilibrium year by year by year, if you look at it. So people have these delusions and fantasies, which are childish and immature, that they project onto the world and then get angry at the world. Why is the world not peaceful and supportive all the time? It's like they're looking for a daddy to put a nipple in their mouth or something instead of reality. And then people have this idea. I spoke at the United Nations and tried to explain to the delegates that they're projecting a fantasy of their value systems onto the world, thinking if the world were to follow their value systems, it would be world peace. And these are delusions. So that's another one. And then they do it on mechanical objects. They expect their computer to read your mind and do what you want, even though you're not doing the keys properly. And then they get angry at a computer and want to throw the computer on the ground, the mechanical objects. So we have unrealistic expectations that automatically breed these negative perceptions. And the negative perceptions are actually feedback systems to help break our fantasies, our unrealistic expectations, to ground us, to set real objectives. That's what the executive center is designed for in the forebrain. to transcend the amygdala's immediate gratification and an escapist survival mentality. The systems one thinking of the amygdala is a survival system. Systems two thinking is thrival. If we want to thrive and do something extraordinary, we're not going to do it by impulses and instincts. We're going to do it by having intuition and inspirations and reason. And we're going to balance our mind and set real objectives in real time with real strategies. And we get things done. You don't make it to Mars as Elon Musk with whims of impulses and instincts. You do it by strategically planning with engineering and mathematics, and you go places and you accomplish and mitigate the risks that you can anticipate with foresight. Hindsight is the least effective way of mastering life. Foresight is the most productive way of making it. Why reinvent the wheel when you can foresee things, learn from mentors, stand on the shoulders of giants and do something extraordinary? So I'm not interested in one-sidedness because I've already gone through that. 37 years ago, I proved that was not the pursuit to take in life.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome, John. That was deep. That was good. It's really good. What can you tell us, John, about your upbringing and your childhood?
Well, when I was born in 1954, I apparently was positioned in the womb a bit odd, and I had my arm and leg turned in. So when I was about one trying to stand up, it just didn't work so well. So starting about 1.5, I started having to wear braces on my arm and leg to get those straightened out. It wasn't a major thing, but it was a bit of a clunky thing to be walking around with braces, and people didn't know how to respond, and kids didn't know how to feel comfortable around that. I also found out that I had a speech impediment. And so about 1.5, I started using buttons and strings in my mouth to strengthen muscle activities and try to get my mouth to properly spell, and not spell, but to pronounce things, make noise. I did that until I was around 4. About 5, I ended up going into little kindergarten class, and I didn't seem to fit in with the boys nor the girls. So I ended up having to sit in the middle of the room. I guess I was destined to go down the middle path because I didn't draw like the boys, and the teacher didn't want me hanging out with the girls. And I was interested in this one little Italian girl. I thought she was cute. But then when I got to first grade, my first grade teacher found out that trying to teach us how to read, found out I wasn't getting anywhere. And I went to the normal reading to remedial reading to finally had to wear a dunce cap. Me and Daryl Dalrymple had to stare out the window and wear a dunce cap because we couldn't read. So I really didn't learn to read until I was 18. I had learning problems. And I would pick up a few words here and there. As long as somebody would tell me what the words meant verbally, I could do pretty good with it, but it wasn't visually for some reason.
How did it
I didn't get meaning out of words.
Make you feel at that time?
Well, it wasn't inspiring to stare out a window with a dunce cap on, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But I became kind of a clown and compensated for it and gained the rapport of some of the kids. Some kids avoided me, but many kids liked me because I had a good personality in a sense. So I was compensating, and so it wasn't like I was losing something. I was just transforming and getting attentions a different way. And because I got out of my braces at 4, I just wanted to run, and I ran and ran and ran and ran and ran, and I got attention because I could run faster than anybody else by then. So I got into sports to get acknowledgement and everything else. So I didn't really miss anything, but I changed it from academic to sports to get acknowledged. But I was definitely considered not the brightest. I made it through elementary school by asking smart kids what they learned. And kids would give me, smart kids, their ego would be massaged if I asked them, what did you get out of it? I'd love to have your opinion on that. And so they would give me information. I would be able to pass school, was feeding off these smart kids. And one of them was a girl, and I liked her. So she was one of the smartest kids. So I got 2 birds in 1 stone. It was a very efficient strategy to be able to get through school and be able to be around this girl. And that worked until I was 12. And by the time I was decent in baseball at the time. And then at 12, my parents moved from Houston, Texas to this small town. And it was a low socioeconomic, and we lived on a kind of a farm area. And there was no smart kids in the school. And there's a lot of racial issues and a lot of gangs and stuff. And I ended up failing and dropping out of school. And so I became a street kid at 13. And I lived in a with friends for a while. Then I lived in a bowling alley. Then I lived in a park, and I slept in cars, and I did odd jobs, whatever I could do, from raking or mowing or anything I could do around people's house. Um, and I survived that way. At 14, I hitchhiked out to California because I wanted to go surfing, because I'd picked up surfing at age 9. And I went out to California and up and down the coast of California, surfing and sleeping wherever I could behind buildings or whatever, and meeting girls. And I mean, it was quite an interesting adventure. And then I went down to Mexico for the summer, part of the summer, and hung out down there and survived down there. And then 15, I panhandled enough money and at Huntington Beach, California, and I flew to LA, from LA to Honolulu. And then I went out to the North Shore and I slept under the Kamehameha Highway Bridge at Sunset Beach and surfed there. And then I went to Iukai Beach Park and slept under a park bench there, which is still there. Then a bathroom if it rained, and then an abandoned car that I found, and then finally a tent that I got for really dirt cheap. And I was social climbing, living in Hawaii, and riding big waves. I got into surf magazines, surf movies, got pretty good in surfing world. And then all of a sudden I nearly died at 17. And in the recovery of that process, at this health food store that somebody led me to try to get some decent food in me, a man told me to go take a yoga class because I had cyanide and strychnine poisoning. I almost died of it. And I went to this yoga class, and this guy named Paul C. Bragg was the guest lecturer there.
Is that
was the night my life.
Is that Paul Bragg, the apple cider vinegar that you see in a lot of supermarkets?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep, that's the guy. Patricia Bragg carried on his tradition, but he was on a nutritional and health crusade. And one night that man spoke, and he shifted my perspective of myself by what he said. I shifted it by what he said. And that was the night I decided that I wanted to overcome my learning problems, someday learn how to read, learn how to speak properly, and someday become intelligent. I'd never thought I was going to be intelligent in the sense of learning. I was intelligent on a surfboard. I was intelligent on how to survive. I was intelligent on picking up girls, but I wasn't intelligent how to read. I never read a book. And so I made a decision that night with this vision that I saw that I wanted to overcome my learning problems, learn how to read, become intelligent, become a teacher. And I wanted to travel the world and do that. And that was the farthest thing I ever imagined would come into my mind that night. But because I thought I was going to be making surfboards with Dick Brewer on the North Shore and living in Hawaii for the rest of my life. I just assumed that was my destiny.
Yeah.
And but that my life pivoted that night drastically. And I ended up learning. I went to the health food store and I picked up my first book, Chico's Organic Gardening and Natural Living. And I tried to go through it. It was all full of pictures of gardens. And I went through there, and it's the first book I ever went through every single page and just looked at it. I didn't read it all, but I looked at it. And then I ended up meditating, and in my meditation, I had this sense that it was time to go back and see my parents. I hadn't seen them since 13, really. I mean, occasionally I would do a collect call or something to them. And we were not, there was no animosity to the parents. I had great parents. I just had learning problems, and I went on an adventure. And my dad said, look, he's not going to make it in school. He's not going to make an MA, but he's good at surfing. Go for it. Go live your dream. Go surf the biggest waves in the world. So I did. So I flew back to LA and hitchhiked back to Texas. When I got there, my mom and dad convinced me it would be to my advantage to take a GED, a high school equivalency test. And miraculously, I passed. I don't know how I did it. I would just close my eyes and went with my intuition and just filled in a little pencil dot, darken this little area, and I guessed and I passed. And that gave me now a high school degree. I'm 18 years old. I have a high school degree. I can go get a job now with that.
Yeah.
And my parents said, well, the surf is down until October in the North Shore. Why don't you try taking a college class? I thought, okay, no harm doing that. So I went and tried to take this little junior college class, and I got a 27. I failed the first test, and everybody was 75 and up. I was 27, and I was so humiliated by that I just cried all the way home, and I curled up in the fetal position under the Bible stand in my mom's living room, my parents' living room. And I really had a dark moment. All I could hear is my first grade teacher who had said to my parents, I'm afraid your son will never be able to read or write, never be able to communicate, never amount to anything, never go very far in life. And I was really having a low moment thinking maybe this whole idea of teaching is a delusion and maybe I best go back and serve. And my mom came home from shopping and she saw me there and she said, son, what happened? What's wrong? She hadn't seen me cry since I was, 13 years old. And I said, Mom, I blew the test. I got a 27. I guess I don't have what it takes after all. And she just paused for a minute and then said something only a mother could say. She said, son, she put her hand on my shoulder and said, son, whether you become a great teacher and travel the world like you dream, whether you return to Hawaii and ride the biggest waves in the world, or return to the streets and panhandle as a bum, I just want to let you know that your father and I are going to love you no matter what you do. And whoa, did I need that at that moment.
That's amazing.
When she did that, my hand went into a fist. I looked up and I saw the vision the night I was with Paul Bragg of me standing in front of 1 million people speaking. And I said to myself, I'm going to master this thing called learning and reading and studying. I'm going to master this thing called teaching. And I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'm going to travel whatever distance. I'm going to pay whatever price to give my service of love across this planet. I'm not going to let anybody on the face of the earth stop me, not even myself. And I had this no turning back mentality. I went and hugged my mom. I went into my room and I got a dictionary out and I made a commitment to studying and memorizing 30 words a day until my vocabulary was strong enough to pass school. And so my mom would test me on 30 words a day. We went from the beginning of the dictionary to the end, and I gained 20,000 words in my brain in the next 2 years and started to excel in school. I excelled in school, became the top student in school because I was more determined than the other kids. Most kids just want to fart around and play around and go there and party and this. I now wanted to learn. And so I just was on a mission to learning and started reading dictionaries, encyclopedias, just grow my vocabulary. And about not even a year later, before I was turning 19, my mom said, what do you want for your birthday? Because I was born on Thanksgiving Day. What do you want for your birthday and for Christmas? I said, Mom, I want the greatest teachings on the face of the earth, the greatest writings humanity's ever created from the greatest minds who ever lived. And she said, sure you don't want a t-shirt? I said, nope, I want the greatest teachings on earth. I want a library. So she contacted her brother, who was a professor at MIT, who was a very bright physicist and chemist. And as a gift, one of the greatest gifts of my life, he sent 2 giant 6 by 6 by 6 foot wooden crates on a flatbed truck to our home. And they were loaded onto the ground. And I went out with a crowbar and opened them up and filled my room with thousands of books. Thousands. It was a massive library. And there were all different types of books, philosophy, mechanics, quantum mechanics, chemistry, astronomy. I mean, this guy was a physicist and a philosopher. And I started to read 18, 20 hours a day. I didn't stop. I slept 4 hours. I meditated, did yoga, and read, or went to school and read on the way to school, read all the way back. I just lived in books and books and books and books, and learned how to read faster and more efficient, and developed speed reading books, reading. And I went on to, now it's 30,680 books I've devoured.
That's remarkable.
And I just read it. And I was told I would never read in my life. I end up doing it. They said I would never amount to anything. I'm living on one of the most magnificent yachts on the planet, sailing around the world today. They said I'd never communicate. I've reached billions of people now with media and communications and things. They said I would never, go very far in life. I've traveled 20 million miles in flights, and I sail around the world nonstop. So whatever they say you can't do, may be the thing you're destined to do. Who knows? All I know is that I'm very grateful for all those things. There's anything that I see in my life that I'm not grateful for, conscious, or if I find in the subconscious, I go back and reframe it and find out how it's fulfilled my mission, because there's nothing there except thank you. So there's no regrets. There's no things that you need to fix. There's nothing you need to hide from anybody. Nothing you need to know. Don't tell them that. Ooh, what would people think? None of that stuff's sitting there. All of it is part of the magnificence and part of the journey, and helps people. So I got a very amazed, grateful adventure. And I can tell people, whoever is out there, don't run your story of how you've been a victim of your history. Ask new sets of questions to see how you're a master of your destiny. Because no matter what's happening in your life, it's on the way, not in the way. It's there for you. Just take the time to look at it and see it from the eyes of a broader perspective and quit labeling it with rigid, narrow-mindedness. See it on the way. Ask yourself new sets of questions. How is whatever's happening to me? How is it helping me fulfill my mission on this earth?
How's it
And
serving
don't
me?
stop teaching. How's it helping me fulfill my mission? Then you'll find out that there's massive momentum, building incremental momentum that's going to be building something amazing in your life.
When
So
you're
I'm
in,
a firm believer.
sorry, when you're in that struggle, the adversity, the challenges, the setbacks, the failures, whatnot, and you're aware to catch yourself out to being triggered and reactive when something you perceive is negative, and you're going into that, I wonder how this is serving me. I wonder how this is, what is the positive of this? I wonder what positive will come from this. How do you find to get yourself, what else do you find to get yourself out of that state, that victim mentality state, that vibration and frequency?
Okay, so most people don't think about this, but I want you to imagine that you have a thing called a positive and negative, right? A magnet. And we'll change that into human language as philia and phobia. Or let me turn around this way. Philia and phobia, tail, head. I'll take my gold medal. So we'll put heads and tails, okay? Philia and phobia. Philia is something you seek, and phobia is something you try to avoid. Now, if you're infatuated with somebody, the more infatuated you are, and the more conscious you are of the positives and unconscious you are of the negatives, the more you seek it, and the more you want to run and grab it, because you're highly infatuated with it. But to the degree of the infatuation, you also have the anxiety and fear of losing it. So if it's moderately infatuated, you have a moderate fear of loss. If it's extremely positive and all positive, no negative, you have absolute anxiety of losing it, which is what religions do when they want to sell you hell and heaven. They want to give you a positive. So I don't want to lose that. And they would do, oh, I don't want to be there. So they get you to try to be a one-sided individual. So the fear of loss of that which you seek and the fear of gain of that which you try to avoid are the two most fundamental fears we have in life. They underlie all fears. If you seek money, you fear its loss. If you try to avoid bills, you seek escaping the bills. If you have something you're conscious of the negatives and unconscious of the positives of, and it's really painful, a phobia, you're afraid of it coming near you, but you have a fantasy of escaping it. Oh, I wish that was over with. So the moment you separate the polarities, the positive negatives, and try to separate those, they're entangled. Paul Dirac, in his book, The Principles of Quantum Mechanics in 1947, showed that the positive and negative polarities, those monopoles, aren't really monopoles. They're inseparably connected by an entanglement. There is no one pole. Maxwell's differential equations show you can't separate those two. But in the mind of human beings, they think they can. And every time they thought they did, it's stored in the subconscious mind to keep running their life. And that subconscious just keeps running their life. It's trying to avoid and seek all the time. They're a survival animal state.
Yeah.
The moment you actually integrate those and see they're simultaneously inseparable, you don't feel the loss of it. You don't feel the gate of it. Now you have adaptability, resilience, and you're now objective. You see simultaneous contrasts that Wilhelm Wundt described in Psychology in 1895. And the simultaneous contrast is the maximum resiliency, maximum simplicity. There's no fragmentation, because every time you have a stored subconscious thing that you think is a positive without a negative, or negative positive, and then you have 5 minutes later another thing you judge and another thing you judge, you create this incredible complexity of noise in the brain that's distracting, which is disempowering and loaded with fears and fantasies. And so when somebody labels something traumatic, the only reason it's called traumatic is because they have a fantasy of how life is supposed to be that doesn't match. And the more the fantasy, the more the nightmare, the trauma. And the higher the probability of the trauma, the higher the probability of the fantasy. So the people that are more in their amygdala searching for one-sided life usually have the most tragic lives, most depressed lives. Depression is a comparison of our current reality to a fantasy, an unrealistic expectation. So if we expect people to be always positive and they're not, and they're balanced, and now we're depressed because they're balanced and they're supposed to be more positive than negative. So that if you're running around with that fantasy, you'll never appreciate anybody. You'll be frustrated by everybody. If you expect them to live in your values, you're going to be betrayed by everybody. So you're going to think world's against you because of your own unrealistic expectations and fantasies of one-sidedness and superiority, thinking your values are right for the whole world. But in the world, there's a complementation, a spectrum of values, and everybody's needed to help make the world adapt. So these underlying delusions that people live by are the very reasons we call things that way. Because if you're expecting only positive, then when something comes up with it's got a little negativity, we go, oh, I want to avoid that. But really, that negativity is actually trying to break our addictions to the positives and put the two together. So I don't see tragedy. I don't see trauma. I don't see terrible. I don't see, turmoil. I don't see these polarities in events. I see all events as neutral. And the thing that actually blocks that neutrality awareness, that middle path, if you will, that Taoist understanding, that equanimity of Christianity, is the moral hypocrisies that are taught by usually politics and religion, that indoctrinate societies, guaranteed to disempower them because they're easier to control that way. And so you have to make a decision in life. Do you want to be part of the herd, or do you want to go out and get herd? Do you want to follow a culture, or do you want to build a culture? You build a culture if you're authentic. You'll follow a culture if you're living by these polarities and stuck in because when you're striving for that which is unobtainable and trying to avoid that which is unavoidable, you disempower yourself. And what you do is you give your decision-making processes over to other people, outer authorities, who have different sets of values. And then you have this limited belief system, which is nothing more than the injection of other people's values into your life and you trying to live by them. You're not here to live in the shadows of anyone or trying to be second at being somebody else. You're here to be your own unique path that contributes and serves people with fair exchange to the world.
And then, John, from there, where did you go from there?
Well, what happened was I was still 18. I wasn't 19 yet. And I had a 375-pound Afro-American woman come up to me in the library at this Wharton school I was at. And she said, I was doing yoga. I had picked up yoga in Hawaii. And so I was doing yoga and just in the back of the library by myself where no one was around. And this lady peered around the bookshelves and looked at me and she said, can you teach me that? And I looked at her. She's 375 pounds and was short and stocky and large. And I thought, man, there's no way in my head. But I thought anybody who's willing to ask me to help them, I'm honored, because I've never had anybody ask me to teach them. And that was my dream. So here I took this lady and I tried to teach her some yoga. And then I was out meditating out in the sun, seeing if I could override the heat, about 100 degrees out. So I was trying to imagine myself sitting in ice and cool and see if I could override the perceptions of heat in my mind, just practicing, training my mind. And this Iranian guy, this Persian guy from Tehran, came up to me and said, can you teach me that meditation stuff you're doing? And so he was my second student, which is still a student today, 50 years later. And then 16 people gathered in a library when I was studying in the library, and they asked me to tutor them on algebra because I was taking algebra and I was in the class and they saw I was doing well. So they gathered around the table and I was teaching them algebra. And then more and more students started gathering. By the time I went to the University of Houston, which is after my two first years in junior college, I would do meditation out under the trees and yoga by myself, just sitting there, and people would gather. And after a while, about 125 to 150, sometimes it swelled to 400 people gathered every day. And they'd gather around and ask questions, and we'd have dialogues sitting under the trees. And if it rained, we went into the cafeteria and they'd come to the cafeteria. And so I started having a following of students at the University of Houston, and then went on to professional school. I taught 6 or 7 nights a week. Almost every single night I taught classes. And wherever anybody in the neighborhood or any store, a health food store, or any school I could teach at, I would do in classes. And I started teaching at the university, the professional school I was at. And then when I got out into practice, I started teaching in my office. And I swole that until I'd have larger numbers in the audience. And then I started doing megaphone systems out into the parking lot. People come in and park their cars and listen. And I got more and more opportunities. And finally, I got to lecture around the state, and then, around the United States, and then eventually other countries. And now I've been able to speak in 176 countries. So
amazing. It's
I've been
extraordinary.
blessed.
Extraordinary.
Yeah.
So did you find like more positive momentum just kept building and building, and the synchronicities and the coincidences kept appearing when you were following your true authentic self?
I think that every symptom in our physiology, every symptom in our psychology, every symptom in our business, every symptom in our social life, every symptom in our relationship life, every symptom in our brain, every symptom in our health, in our physiology, in our soul, everything is trying to get us to authenticity. If you see that everything that's going on in life is trying to get you authentic and acts as a homeostatic feedback system, you're on your way to mastering your life. I'm absolutely certain that's a very powerful perspective to have, because you're not sitting there comparing all these events out there to fantasies, which then you're not appreciating your life. Every moment you store a fantasy, and then you're not appreciating life. You store that in the subconscious mind, and that weighs you down and makes you live in survival. You don't thrive there, you survive there. And so, yeah, it's knowing how to ask the question that brings you back into authenticity. But everything is going on that way. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're in business, and you look down on your customer, and you think you know more than the customer. And you look down on your employees. You think you know better than them. And you feel superior to the employees, and you're authoritative. And you look down on the customer, and you think, well, they're stupid if they don't buy what I think is important. Okay, well, what's going to happen? You're going to end up having a union form in the employees, because they're going to revolt because they're not feeling that there's a fair exchange. Your customers are going to walk away because they're not getting their needs met. And then you're eventually going to get pride before the fall, and you're going to be humbled again to get back in equilibrium. And so the symptoms of the business are trying to get you back where authenticity, where there's equity between you and other people, sustainably. And if you go the other direction, you minimize yourself, and you got all these employees, and you let them do whatever they want. You got anarchy. And then you got chaos, and there's no order to it. And then the employee does it, and then there's no profit margin. And so you're out of business. And so you eventually go, damn it, I deserve more than that. And then you come back up again. And so all the symptoms in the business, I guarantee I've gone through and consulted with companies and gone through and shown every one of the situations and problems they think there are. It's always trying to get everybody in there maximally performing at authentic states where they're living engaged. That's all the symptoms of the business are. The same thing in our brain. Anytime you have a perception that's imbalanced, you have facilitation inhibition, you have ratios of neurotransmitters and signal molecules that get out of balance, and you have brain noise. You don't have clear consciousness. You don't have maximum simplicity. And so that's a feedback system getting you back to homeostasis. In your relationship, if you're cocky and you talk down and expect them to live in your values, they can't. It's futile. And they get resistance. And then they start cutting you down and criticizing you to try to level the playing field. And if you minimize yourself, they say, go get a life, stand up for yourself, and they'll try to get you to get back in equilibrium. Everything is trying to get us back to authenticity and sustainable fair exchange. Once you really, really get that and see that every symptom's there and know how to interpret those symptoms through those eyes, you're grateful for your life, because it's constantly keeping you authentic. That's the beauty of life. And the magnificence of your authentic self is far greater than any fantasies about how you're supposed to be, is greater than any fantasies you'll impose on yourself. So don't envy somebody. Don't imitate somebody. Don't try to be somebody you're not. Be yourself.
And that's the key to life.
That's a very powerful key to mastering your life. Guarantee it.
Yeah. And with the, on that note, I guess leading into, I believe, is one of the top 5 books I've read of all time, is the book, The Values Factor. I just found it really profound with some of the stories in there. And I was wondering if you can share some of those stories with the guests.
Well, there's in that book, there's thousands of stories that, we could be dealing with, but people sometimes expect themselves to live outside their values. I gave an example yesterday where we had a young boy who was 16 years old, who had a mother who was around 40, and she was an accountant. And she had been divorced, who was raising this 16-year-old on her own. And she was starting to build up some frustration because he was mainly spending most of his day in front of the computer doing video games and video development and computer work. She really was not computer literate at the time. She really didn't understand what he was dedicated to, and started getting on his case and projecting her values onto him and telling me he needs to go get a paper route, he needs to go to work at McDonald's, or he needs to go get a job somewhere and get minimum wage and this kind of thing. So no matter what was happening, they were butting heads, the teenage days. And she was frightened of going too far because her only man in her life, and she's also put a little bit of an expectation to grow up to be the man in her life, part of a husband, because she doesn't have a husband. So he's got a little bit of pressure on him. So she's kind of playing a mother and a father role and all kind of things, and they've got a very interesting dynamic going. So then she asked me, she says, look, can you talk to my son and talk some sense in him, get him off his butt? He's lazy. And anytime somebody labels somebody lazy, it's because they're projecting their values onto them and expecting them to do what they think is important, not what the individual that they're projecting onto is important. So I went into his room, his house, because I went to their house, and said, so your mom's on your case, huh? And he goes, yeah, 16-year-olds. And he said, yeah, she's on my case. I said, what are you up to? He says, oh, I'm just doing some computer programming. I said, show me what you're doing. And the kid was a genius. I mean, the kid was like amazing. And he was just writing code at incredible speeds and creating video games at 16. I'm talking about the graphics. I'm talking about the strategies. I'm talking about the reward and punishment systems. I mean, he was putting this thing together because he'd been playing video games for many years, 10 years or so. And his mother had no idea he was capable of doing this. After talking to him for the hour, I realized this kid's got talent I could use because I needed some of that knowledge he had. So I walked out there and the mother said, well, did you talk some sense into the kid? And I said, no, I didn't. I hired him. She said, what do you mean you hired him? I said, I hired your son to develop some software for me, some applications for me. My son? I said, yeah, your son is an ingenious with computers and software development. And I don't know about you, but if he could be set free to go do that, he will excel. Well, anyway, she had a realization that day and started to channel the energy instead of away from what he was to do, to try to make him somebody he wasn't, to try to honor who he was, according to his values, his priorities, not hers. So she came off the pedestal. Instead of being an autocrat, projecting values, she brought those back into equilibrium, honored his set of values, and said, how can we create a path where I win and you win doing so? So now he's going down a special path of education where he can go and do that. Now he's being honored for doing that. And he was making money. So I helped. He did for over a year. He developed for me and I paid him. It wasn't massive amount of money, but it was a fair amount of money for what he was doing. And he started on it and he started picking up clients. And he had a little entrepreneurial business doing software development. And a branch of IBM picked him up. And I end up seeing him a number of years later. And his mother and him are in the front row of a presentation I was doing in Brisbane, Australia. And I came down off the steps. I reached down and I hugged him. And she whispered into my ear and she said, he works with IBM. That's one of his clients. He makes $275,000 a year now. He's making more money than me twice. My son, the genius. And I gave his son a big hug. He's a big guy. He's grown more. And I said, you followed your path of authenticity. And he goes, I know. thank you that day. It's changed my life. The people sometimes expect others to live in their values, and then they put labels on people. Attention deficit, while the child can sit for 8 hours totally focused on something that's important to the child. They don't have attention deficit when they're playing soccer. They don't have attention deficit when they're doing video games or they're doing Facebook. They have attention deficit when they're doing classes that are uninspiring to them, that they don't see as going to help fulfill their goals. And I believe that every teacher deserves to articulate what they're going to teach in terms of that individual child's value system, so that child can be engaged. So they're not labeling them and putting them on medication and punishing them for not being attentive to their boring classes. You know, you have a responsibility as a teacher to engage people. So that's just one sample of that. Then I had a guy come to me and he says, Dr. Demartini, I'd like to consult with you. And I said, okay. He said, I'd like you to help me become successful. And I said, okay. I said to him, so where are you successful? He said, Dr. Demartini, I'm not successful. I want to be successful. And I said, no, I didn't ask that. I said, where are you successful? But I'm not successful. I want to be successful. You're not hearing me. I said, no, you're not hearing me. I'm asking, where are you already successful? And he fought with me for a minute. He said, well, I'm not. And I don't want to waste money and time asking me that question. I said, well, I'm asking you that. If you want to be consulting with me, you're going to answer my question here. So where are you successful? Where are you doing what you say you wanted to do and you're achieving it? And he went, oh. And then he said, I got an amazing relationship with my wife. I think she's like my soulmate. We've been together for almost 11 years. And it's amazing relationship. And that was my goal. And I think in that area, we have a successful marriage. I said, where else are you successful? I got a son who's in baseball. He's 10 years old and I'm the coach and I help him and I help the team and we're probably going to win the pennant this year. So I guess in coaching for baseball and my son and raising my son to be in baseball, I'm successful. Great. Where else are you successful? Well, now I think about it, my mother-in-law lives with us. Most people don't want their mother-in-law living with them, but she's the most amazing lady and she's like amazing to help with the kids. And we have an amazing relationship. And that's, I think, a success. What else? Our whole family works in the yard and we've got this beautiful flowered and trimmed yard. And we're going to probably get yard of the month for the neighborhood. I said, what else? He says, well, I'm also with this church and I do Wednesdays and sometimes Sundays, I do ministerial work and teach. And that has been a dream of mine since my 20 years old. And yeah, I guess I have a success there. And we made a list of all the successes. And then I stopped. I said, now, can you see you are doing some of the things you set out to do and are achieving them? He goes, I can. I said, the only reason you think you're not successful is because you're comparing yourself to somebody that has a different set of values. So who are you comparing yourself to? He said, I think you're right. I said, who is it? He said, well, there's a guy on top of the hill who's got a 3-car garage. He's got a 6,000 square foot home. He's got, a big practice. I got a small practice. He's got a big practice. He's got cars. He's got, he's successful. And I said, okay, so you're comparing yourself to him. Now, let me share with you something here. Do you know his very well? He says, yeah, I know him pretty good. He says, how is his relationship with his wife? He said, it's interesting you ask. Very volatile. Sometimes they separate, they get back together again, they fight. You can hear them sometimes in the yard, they're yelling. Yeah, very volatile, crazy relationship, but they're still in there. I said, okay. And how's his relationship with his children? Does he have a son? He goes, yeah, he's got a son. What's the deal with his son? Is he also in base? No. He's got problems. He's uninspired in school. He's doing drugs and they're having to deal with him quite a bit. And I said, okay. So now what about the mother-in-law? Well, they moved out of the country to get away from her because she's a psycho. And I hear him talk about it all the time. That says that if you could just get rid of her, eliminate her, it would be a peaceful family finally. Because she's constantly trying to get in there and tell them how to live their lives and things. And I said, and what about the yard? Does he go out and work in the yard? No, he's got people to do that. I don't think he even cares about it. Sometimes he drives over his yard. He doesn't even pay attention to it. And does he go to church or does he do something at the church? No, he's not into that. He's just focused on his business. And I said, let me explain to you something. This man is successful in his values, which is apparently more business oriented, financial oriented, and lower on family and spiritual and social. He's more, well, not necessarily social because he's serving people, but not the same way you do.
Yeah.
But you have a value in family, and you have a value in spirituality, and you have a value of contribution in your religion, and your contribution in your children and your wife. You have a much higher value in that. He says, well, I do. That's my highest value is my family and my spirituality. I said, on your list of values, business and finance is probably 4 or 5. And on his, it's number 1. He says, well, that's true. I said, so anytime you expect yourself to live in somebody else's values, you're going to beat yourself up. Because you're going to, anytime, whatever's highest on your value, you spontaneously are inspired to do, and you do it intrinsically. You don't need motivation to get you to do it. But whatever's low on your values, you need outside motivation to keep you focused on it. And you keep procrastinating, hesitating, frustrating, and constantly need reminding and remotivating and stuff. And you don't want to live your life that way. You want to delegate those things and stick to what you excel at. I said, so he's not more successful than you. He just has a different form of success. And he's not less successful than you. But he probably envies you about your relationship and the way you handle your family and your spiritual stability. And you probably envy him. But if you envy somebody else and imitate somebody else that has a different set of values, you'll self-defeat. You'll beat yourself up. You'll think you're not successful. That's the reason why I asked you, where are you successful? You're not missing anything. Nothing's missing in you, but you'll think there's something missing the second you compare yourself to somebody else and put them on a pedestal. And they don't deserve to be put on a pedestal. They don't deserve to be put in a pit. They're not superior, inferior to you. They're just different than you. And the moment you get that and honor the form that you have, you'll appreciate your love and life. And you realize that what you have is pretty magnificent to contribute to the world. And you build momentum in your own values instead of trying to be beating yourself up, trying to live in other people's values. And he looked at me and he goes, I can't argue with any of that. It's right on the money. And I'm already feeling less anger at myself. He said, but is there any way of changing the values so I can make some extra money? Because my wife would like us to buy some things and some stuff. I said, I can shift your values. I can raise up business and finance on your values and move you in that direction. But the other values are going to slide down and you're going to have a little less time and energy on some of these other things possibly. So be prepared for that. You know, you're not going to get a pleasure without a pain, as they say. So if you're willing to do that, I can show you how to shift your values. I can stack it up. I can say, how is building your business and how is saving and investing money and the buying assets long-term going to help your family, help your child, help you in school, help in your spiritual. And we can reassociate your brain so it's allowing that to be included. And I said, if you want that, I can do that. And that'll be maybe our next session. And he said, yes, I would like to do that. But I'm not interested in being him. I'm interested in being me, but with just a little bit more business and finances so I could provide more for my family. If she wanted to provide more for her family.
Yeah.
So those are examples of value systems.
Yeah.
And how we function in value systems.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Really fascinating. And I got the opportunity a couple of years ago. It was in 2020 actually, of attending the breakthrough experience while the last 2 years of the interesting times have been happening. And I found it was profound. It was a profound experience for myself personally. The people I worked on I went through all the traits of my father, and then I also did it of my mother. And it was interesting, like a few days after, it could have been a week or 2 weeks after the event. And I was driving, I might have been listening to a podcast, wasn't really thinking, just zoned out while I was driving. And the gift and the blessing just dropped in of the benefit and how my life has been served with my parents. And up until that point, I think at the time I was 34 years old, and I could never see the positives of their negatives, and it would frustrate me. I wouldn't tell them personally about it, but it would just run around in my head in loops, and I'd be like, there they go again, there they go again, there they go again. And what was amazing about it was it freed me of, whenever I go and see them, is those thoughts don't run around in my head anymore.
Now you can be present with them.
I'm present with them, and come from a place of unconditional love and thank my upbringing. Whereas before, I'd be like, why have I got this upbringing? Why did I choose them as my parents? I must be an alien or something.
But because what happens is you have this fantasy about how they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And the fantasy is interfering with loving people as they are.
Yes. And what's amazing
is the guy.
Yeah. And what's amazing is we would not be here having this conversation on this podcast series if I didn't have the upbringing that I had in the way it had to happen. So it's magnificent. So,
well, that's why I say the unrealistic expectations that we impose on our life, that life is supposed to be other than what it is. Anytime we expect the world to be other than what it is, we're not going to appreciate our life. The magnificence of the way it is what we want to find, because otherwise you're comparing it to something the way it should have been or would have been or could have been or whatever, and you're never going to appreciate what it is. So I'm a firm believer that all the things that we think are traumas in our life weren't traumas. We made them traumas because of our comparison to the fantasies that we were holding on to, which is sort of our amygdala's search for a fantasy. And then once we realized that what happened was exactly what we needed on our journey, there's nothing there except thank youness. And that's healing. That changes physiology. It changes psychology and allows us to be inclusive of more people instead of exclusive.
Can you share a little bit about the breakthrough experience with some other stories of types of people that you've had attend, like, just for example, like people with physical abuse, suicidal, depression, those types of things?
Sure. You got a couple of months, a couple of years?
Just briefly.
I'll what popped in my mind, I'll share a couple that popped in my mind. I was in Los Angeles doing the breakthrough experience. And when we were in Los Angeles doing, we get a lot of celebs and stuff coming. And this particular breakthrough experience, we had a young man, a quite ingenious young man there, who I didn't know what he did, but he was quiet, didn't say a lot, and was really having a difficult time doing the method that I developed, the Demartini method. And he was really bitter to his father because his mother died when he was young. And his father demanded that he do everything the mother did. So he had to clean, he had to go shopping, he had to cook, he had to do all this stuff from age 4. So the father was sort of a rough one, right? Disciplinarian and aggressive and this stuff. And if the son didn't do what he said, he used to beat him. And sometimes with a baseball bat. And so the only place he could get away from his dad was to hide under the bed and protect himself with pillows, because the bed was heavy and his father didn't always pull the bed down and then chase him, but he'd hide under there. So whenever we're under a freeze response, when we can't fight somebody, we can't flight somebody, but we feel there's more drawbacks and benefits, we freeze in the brain and create a dissociation in a fantasy world to compensate, to counterbalance that for homeostasis purposes, to maintain our mind steady. And these dissociations become realities for some people, and they end up with bipolar condition and sometimes schizoid behavior. But in this case, he dissociated. So he had rage to his father because he didn't match the fantasy about what he wanted a father. He wanted a father that was nurturing and kind and this and that. And he wanted a mother, even though he had a lady that lived, right down the street and was playing the mother role for him. and would secretly come by during the day when the father was at work and played the opposite pole, overly nurturing, overly protective. And the more he was being aggressive, the more overprotecting, because that woman knew about the father. And so he was getting both sides, and the pair of opposites are what make love anyway. So my facilitators and I, which are people that I've trained to do the method, were trying to work with him, but he was just, you might say, addicted to the story that he's got. And it was serving him, apparently. And he didn't want to give up the idea that his father was this evil man. So he couldn't see where he'd done any of those behaviors, refused to see it. He couldn't find any benefits to it. He was just rigid. So my facilitators who tried to help him came to me and said, look, we're just not getting anywhere with this guy. He's just refusing to answer. He's refusing to work. He's just sitting here and he's being defiant. And I said, fine, we're not meeting his needs. We're not reaching a point where he's getting something out of it. So our approach needs to be modified. So I went over to him and I said, so what exactly did your father do? He was cruel and abusive. I said, that's too vague. What did he actually do with his actions? He used to hit me with a baseball bat. And I said, great. What's the benefit of that? He said, how can you benefit from being hit with a baseball bat? I said, I don't know. Let's find it. What's the benefit you got out of it? And we were getting nowhere for a few minutes. And finally, I asked him, what do you do for a living? He says, I'm the leading animator for Disney. I create animating pictures for Disney fantasy movies. I said, where did you develop that skill? He said, under my bed. I said, so what you're saying is when your dad would hit you with a baseball bat, he helped you become one of the greatest animators that's touching millions of people's lives? And he looked at me and he stopped. And he broke down in tears. And he goes, wow, I never saw the correlation. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if it wasn't for my father. I said, did you give him a percentage of all the money you've made out of it? He said, no. I became a multimillionaire in my 30s because of it. Wow.
It's powerful.
And he started crying. He started crying and he goes, I never saw the connection. I thought it was in spite of my father, but it's also because of my father. There were pains and pleasures. And I lived in that world. And I create with that world. And I've used it as a way of making a difference in kids at that age. My animations are for kids sitting under that bed. And he just bawled. And I hugged him. And people around the room walked around. They were crying and they went and hugged him too. Just surround him with hugs. And he had a gully washer. And when he came out of that, I said, who here represents your father? And there was a man there that was somehow resemblant his father. He said, this man, I've been noticing him the whole time I've been here. I said, I had the man come up and sit right in front of him. What's in your heart you want to share with your father? And he reached over and just hugged him and held him in his arms and shook. They just quivered. Now, what was amazing is the man that he picked had a son that he was aggressive to.
Wow.
And so they had this amazing moment. And the father said, the man said, who played the father role, he said, I have waited 30 years for this moment to know my son loved me and to let him know I love him. There was not one person in that room that wasn't in tears, not one. Everybody was sitting looking for Kleenex because it was an authentic moment for two people loving each other. Now, some people would say, well, was that going to make him not able to do his animation? No, he continued with his animation, but now with a different meaning. With gratitude to his dad. Gratitude, never lost his skills. He just found the source of why he developed that skill. But now he was doing it for a different reason. So it's interesting. So that's another, I mean, there are thousands of cases.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Mind blowing. I had another gentleman who was 58 years old, who had not seen his father for 42 years. And him and his father had a fist fight at 16. And he stood up to his father and they punched each other, about knocked each teeth out almost. It was a real fist fight. And the father finally told him, get out of the house and don't come back. So the guy said, okay. He left, never to see his father for 42 years. Didn't care, said, I'll spit on his grave. So he came to the breakthrough experience. And I said, okay, so who is it that you've got the biggest resentment to, that's the biggest burden in your life? And he finally admitted his father. I said, so let's write down every specific trait, action, or inaction you perceived your father displaying or demonstrating that you despise, hate, etc. And listed them all. And let's prioritize them. And let's go and own where you've done those behaviors. So we went in there and I helped him identify it. And he was having difficulty because he didn't want to admit it, because his pride wanted to protect himself from being like his father. But when he really looked at it, he'd done it in his work, to his colleagues, to his employees, to his own children, to his wife, to a girlfriend, people in a brawl that he had at a game one time. You know, he did the same things. He owned it all. And then I said, what's the benefit to that? And he wasn't willing to go all the way, but he started getting some benefits out of it. He became an entrepreneur. He gave street smartness. He did his own studies. People know him because of his background, and they honored him even more because he came from, a teenager on his own. And he saw the benefits. And he went through the process. And we got to the very last question. If your father had not been that, had been the way you hoped it had been, what would have been the drawback to your life? He said, it wouldn't be a drawback. I said, well, that's a fantasy. A fantasy is a positive without a negative. What would be the drawback? I can't see any. Then I said to him, I came in with a left hook. And I said, did you have any brothers or sisters? He said, I had a brother. I said, did your father treat your brother the same as you? He said, no. I said, did he treat him the way you hoped he would have treated you? He said, yes. I said, so then it means you believe that your brother got what you hoped for? He said, yes. I said, would you trade places with your brother today? Would you want his life today? He said, God, no. He's still living at home. He's never had a real career. Dad has rescued him all his life and has taken care of him, and he's waiting for dad to die to get to inheritance. I said, so you would prefer that life? He said, I did until just this moment. Wow. And now I realize that I became an entrepreneur because of his toughness. And I said, what if you found out that your father didn't believe in the other brother, and he believed in you and believed you were tough enough? That's why he let you go. But he never would have let your other brother go because he didn't think he was capable of standing on his own 2 feet. And he rescued him. So maybe that so-called fantasy affection that you thought you wanted was a fantasy. And what it was is actually holding you back from something great. And he started bawling. And he just started crying. And I said, who here's your father again? And he picked a man, and he got in front of the man and he spoke to his father for the first time in 42 years, this surrogate. And what the man said was deeply meaningful to him, and they bawled and they hugged each other. It was amazing watching. And afterwards he came up to me and he gave me a hug. He says, that was worth this whole course. I said, great. And he left. And that night, he left about 12:15. That night he got home at 12:30. He found out where his father was. He was in a different time zone, different country. And he called his father after 42 years. And on the other end, instead of a monster, was this receptive man. He said, this is your son. I'd like to come see you. And on the other end, he said, that would mean everything to me to see you, son. I'd love to hear all about your life. That would mean the world to me. So he went Wednesday and flew all the way to see his father, got there Wednesday night, met with his father all day Thursday, said to his father what he said to the man, and the father said almost identical words back. And they had a tearing experience, reuniting. And he flew back to Sydney, Australia. And his father died the next day. And he came to me at the next breakthrough. He brought some friends, and he came to the next breakthrough, and he hugged me, walked in and just hugged me, big guy. And he said, thank you. I got to say that I loved my father before he died. I really believe he was 82 years old. I really believed he didn't want to die until he heard that. And the moment he did, he felt he completed his life.
It's powerful.
I said, thank you, because what that did is it changed my relationship with my son and changed my relationship with my father that moment. It was amazing. And that changed the trajectory of how he perceived his life and realized that all the things that he thought were in the way, now on the way. And that's what people can do. And it works both ways. Sometimes we think we get this fantasy, we think this all positive thing. And then we realize it's partly the thing that's holding us back. Because now we've got a fantasy that life's supposed to be always that way. And then we not appreciate life because we're comparing it to these moments. So it's wise to balance out the equation and see both sides of the magnet if you want to have magnetism to attract what you want in life.
It's remarkable. And is there any like the bit at the end with the breakthrough experience we got to do was the awaken the trait, owning the traits of the greats. Was there anything you'd like to share with that?
I had a young girl in Los Angeles who came with her mom to a talk I did evening at the Fairmont Hotel there in Santa Monica. She was 16 years old. She had an iPod with little things in her ears, little plugs in her ears, and was listening to music and chewing gum. It's a typical 16-year-old. I don't think she heard a word I said that night, but her mother was hoping she would. And her mother's a little bit upset. She apologized to me and said, I'm sorry for my daughter being such a distraction in the front. I said, she didn't distract. She's doing 16-year-old stuff. She's listening to music. That's her highest value. Well, 3 years later, that same woman brought her daughter to the breakthrough experience because now a boyfriend jilted her for another guy, another girl, and she was distraught. And she felt she had a need, and she thought maybe I could help because the mother said I could be able to help her. So she comes to the breakthrough experience, and we do the method, and we clear the infatuation and buried resentment on the boyfriend, and realize that he was substandard anyway. It wasn't really what she thought. She was blind because he was daring, but he was really just a player with it. And she was an underdog, and she was infatuated. Whenever you're infatuated, you're going to get jilted. That's normal. That's healthy, actually. It's not a match. So she saw it. She saw the perfection of it. And then in the breakthrough, she said, we wrote down what she wanted to dedicate her life to. And she really wanted to be a singer and performer and act. And a lot of teenagers have this, but it looked like a sincere objective. Looking at her life, she was listening to music, she was singing, and she was dancing, and she was doing things, and she was putting on acts and doing a little bit in school. But she really made a commitment. Now she's going to go down that path. So she started getting specialized knowledge, specialized training. The mother helped her, started doing vocals, started doing choreography, put together a little band, started to develop a band. People would go in and out of the band. She eventually got a stable group and started to launch. By the time she was around 21, she actually got to do gigs. She was doing gigs and getting good vocals and put out her own little CDs.
Sorry, have a good day.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you. My team have come in and just clean the room. So I say goodbye. They're lovely. They come in twice a day and help keep me in shape here. But anyway, so she's now really starting to build momentum. And then she came to a program I did called on leadership and self-mastery, a 7-day program, and really got more clear about what she wanted to do, and a planning program, and really mapped out her strategy where she was going to go so she could become a pop star. And she kept building bigger things, and she started doing more CDs and more albums and stuff, and she got it somewhere. She started saving her money, investing her money, and doing things. And over the next 3 years, she was really becoming known in the LA area, not internationally, but LA. She was starting to get into the local gigs. And sometimes she'd, be advertised on a bus side or something, and a billboard things and stuff. And it was starting to grow. And then she came to another program, and I reminded her, I said, did you own the traits of the greats yet? She says, no, I keep thinking, but I haven't done it. I said, let's start. It'll make a difference. So let's make a list of the top people that you look up and admire. Lady Gaga, Madonna, Beyonce, all these female diva guy icons. And so she did it. She identified the top behaviors that she admired and despised, liked and disliked about them. So she had a balanced view of them and didn't put them on some fantasy, and balanced it and started looking where she's done every one of those traits to the same degree, quantitative and qualitative, is what she saw in them, and neutralize them and go through my entire method with them. And I call it owning the traits of the greats. And she did Madonna, and she finished that one, but she didn't see massive difference. Didn't see anything massively different, except maybe she got an extra gig or two, but she didn't really see massive difference. She dated Lady Gaga. And this was over about a 3-month period, did Lady Gaga. And again, didn't see a lot of change. But then she did Beyonce. And that took about a month to finish Beyonce. And 2.5 weeks afterwards, out of the blue, Beyonce called her and asked her to perform at her home to a special social event where hundreds of people were going to be there, and all in the industry.
That's amazing.
And that pushed her career up a whole new notch. Now she's a multimillionaire. She's now got albums. She's now got some of her songs in movies. She's now got new album came out recently. I mean, she's doing amazing stuff. She's got her own wardrobe people. She's got her own makeup people. She's got her own, graphic people, her own choreography team. She's going places. And because she was congruent with what she valued, the values factor, and that's when you will be relentless and pursue it without effort. It just feels like you're loving what you do. And she's willing to put in the Gladwell's 100,000 hours, not 10,000 hours, 100,000 hours into vocal, into singing, into performing, into practicing, into getting it and listening to people and guide it and to push forward on this thing. So she's on her way. But the point is, she started out with a dream. She prioritized her daily life. She delegated things to specialists. She saved and invested her money and valued herself. She owned the traits of the greats, which is what she did. And she's still done that. But now it's not just to music artists. It's now to people that own, brands and labels and wealthy individuals and iconic people. Now she's owning bigger circles and playing in a bigger game because of it. So I'm absolutely certain that a person can transform, an individual can transform their position in life. Because I say in the breakthrough experience, at the level of the soul is the state of unconditional love where we're most authentic. At the level of the soul, nothing's missing in us. But the level of the senses, things appear to be missing in us when we're too proud or too humble to admit what we see in others is inside us. All of those things we're too proud or too humble to admit we have are disowned parts. And all those disowned parts are voids that stop us from doing something extraordinary with our lives. You want fulfillment, own it all. I'm a hero and a villain, a saint and a sinner, a virtue and a vice. I'm all the above. Nothing's missing me. I don't need to get rid of half of myself to love myself. That's a liberating state of consciousness.
Powerful, very powerful stuff. And John, if there was someone listening to this that they might not be able to afford to attend the breakthrough experience just yet, but would love to go, where could they start? Obviously, is that you've got your the 13 questions determine your values online. Where can we find that?
Well, you can go to the drdemartini.com.
Yep.
And you could spend the rest of your life on there educating yourself on hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. I've done 9,000 to 10,000 interviews. There's interviews, there's podcasts, there's webinars, there's articles by the thousands. They're there for you. It's free. Take advantage of it. When you're ready, come to the breakthrough experience. But do the value determination process on the website. Go and watch the YouTube videos, the WhatsApp. Start going and educating yourself. Take advantage of it. There's a vast amount of information on my website. It's there for an education purpose. And They can do that. And also I've got another book coming out called The 7 Secret Treasures. That'll be it's about how to empower all areas of your life, because you're here to master your life. And but just go online and just browse and just see where it takes you. Let your heart guide you. And because there's a lot you could be listening. I have people all over listening and just doing it and sending letters and saying, yeah, I listen to this little podcast. I listen to this little thing. Your podcast today will be on there, so they'll be able to get there. We reach thousands of people with your podcast, so people know about your podcast. And there's tons of those things. So that's the best way to just get to know what I'm up to. And if there's of interest and they're ready for coming to the breakthrough experience, I would love to share what I've got there, because I'm certain that's a practical program where you get to work it, not just hear about it, read about it, but actually do it.
Yes,
and that's what transforms lives.
Yes. Yeah, it's profound and it's powerful. And what's great about it, I think, is you can share it with others on all different topics and go through that process. If there was someone out there that's like struggling, depressed, suicidal thoughts, just really stuck in it, they're aware that, things to break out of that state, but what would you say to that person right now if it just meant that they could live another day or get through another day?
Well, first, to look in the mirror and say, no matter what I've done or not done, I'm worthy of love. And because if you're comparing yourself to others, you may not believe that. And don't put people on pedestals or pits, put them in your heart. Start seeing whatever you see in others inside yourself, and start prioritizing your life, and surround yourself with people that are greater at what you want to delegate, and get on with doing what you're greatness at, and get your core competence so you can build up momentum and confidence in your own contribution, and liberate yourself from what most people trap themselves by.
Thank you, John. And just one last question. What does unlocked from within mean to you?
Everything we've been talking about on this special show.
Awesome, John. Well, thanks for your time today. It's just been amazing, the value that you've dropped and the lessons and the stories. It's been remarkable. So again, thank you. It's an honor to be able to have you as a guest and to just listen to the wisdom that you bring and share. So again, I'd like to say thank you. Thank you again today to everybody that's listened to Unlocked from Within. I hope you got a lot of value out of today's discussions, and I hope it will serve you in the future. Please subscribe and share to anyone that you think this could help out. It means a lot. If you'd like to follow more of Dr. John Demartini's work, you can check him out on Facebook at Dr. John Demartini. You can also check him out on Instagram at Dr. John Demartini. And if you'd like to know more about his workshops and free information, you can check him out at drdemartini.com. And also on there is the 13 questions to determine your true values. I highly recommend doing so. Again, thank you for tuning in, and please subscribe. Thank you.